There are certain moments in life when time slows, not in the poetic sense, but in that heavy, suffocating way that signals something is wrong. For me, it happened just after 2 a.m., the house cloaked in silence, save for the subtle creak of the wooden floor beneath my bare feet. I hadn't planned to wander. I'd simply stirred from sleep, thirsty, restless, uneasy. My husband, Anthony, lay peacefully beside me, one hand curled around the edge of the duvet, his breathing soft and even. I remember thinking how calm he looked. Trusting. Unaware. That trust was about to be broken. I padded quietly down the hallway, careful not to wake him, the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen my only companion. Until I heard something else. A sound. Faint. Rhythmic. Unmistakably digital, the soft tap of a keyboard, the faint flicker of light pulsing beneath a closed door. Matthew's door. Matthew, my 25-year-old stepson, had moved back in 3 months earlier after losing his job in Manchester. At first, Anthony was thrilled. "It's just for a bit," he'd said with a proud smile. "He just needs time to get back on his feet." I hadn't objected. Not even quietly. Matthew had always been respectful, if distant. He'd been 18 when I married his father, polite enough, if a little cold. We kept our distance, and I never tried to be anything more than what I was, his father's wife. But now, Matthew wasn't the same awkward teenager who barely spoke at the dinner table. Something about him had shifted. He carried himself differently, broader shoulders, confident posture, and a quiet, unshakable presence that filled a room before he spoke. At times, I caught him watching me, not overtly, but long enough to make me question whether I'd imagined it. I convinced myself it was nothing. That I was being silly. Until that night. As I passed by his door, the light from the laptop screen seeped through the narrow crack. I paused, instinctively, not rationally. Just a glance, I told myself. Just to check he was all right. What I saw stopped me cold. The video on his screen was unmistakably us, me and Anthony. In a moment that should have been private, intimate, sacred. It wasn't something we'd ever filmed. Not intentionally. Not knowingly. And yet there it was, playing in full view on Matthew's screen, the bluish glow illuminating his face. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't surprised. He didn't even flinch. He knew I was there. His eyes lifted slowly from the screen and met mine through the gap in the door. And then, God help me, he smiled. Calmly. As if he had been waiting for me to find it. I froze. The glass of water I'd been holding trembled in my hand. I should have stormed in. I should have woken Anthony. I should have shouted. Demanded answers. Asked how long this had been happening, how he'd gotten access, why he thought this was remotely acceptable. But I didn't. I stood there. Still. As if trapped in a moment I couldn't escape. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs. And his eyes never left mine. That night, I should have walked away. I should have pretended I hadn't seen anything, gone back to bed, and waited for morning light to fix what had begun to unravel. But I didn't walk away. And that's when everything began to fall apart. In the days that followed that night, that terrible, unforgettable night, I told myself it was a mistake. A misstep. A lapse in judgment I could ignore if I just held my breath long enough and carried on like nothing had happened. But nothing felt normal anymore. I didn't tell Anthony. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even when we sat across from each other sipping coffee and chatting about our weekend plans like strangers playing house. I opened my mouth twice to say something, anything, and both times, nothing came out. What would I even say? That our son had been watching us? That I'd caught him, and instead of confronting him, I just stood there frozen? That he'd looked straight at me, and smiled? No. There were no words for it. Only a sickly ache I couldn't shake and a mounting pressure behind my ribs I didn't yet know how to name. And Matthew, he changed. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe I was simply seeing the real version of him now, the one he'd hidden behind teenage awkwardness and silence for years. He became bolder. It began with moments so subtle, they could be written off as accidents. A hand brushing my lower back in the hallway. A towel dropped too slowly in the shared bathroom. That unnerving habit of appearing behind me, always too close, always silent until he wanted me to jump. I'd pretend not to notice. He'd pretend not to mean it. But we both knew. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the lounge, he leaned against the doorframe watching me. "You seem different lately," he said, a small smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Do I?" I kept my eyes on the clothes. "You're not upset about what you saw," he murmured. "You're excited." My hands stopped moving. That one sentence cracked something open in me, fear, yes, but also something much worse, doubt. Was I? I hated myself for even entertaining the idea, but the thought lingered, poisonous and persistent. The line between revulsion and curiosity blurred until I couldn't tell one from the other. Then came the storm. The kind of night that twists wind through the trees and makes you feel like something's waiting in the dark. Anthony had left that morning for a 2-day conference in Bristol. The house was quiet, and the power had flickered off just after 9 p.m. I lit a few candles in the kitchen and tried to distract myself with dishes that didn't need washing. The windows rattled with each gust of wind. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and menacing. And then I felt it. That presence behind me. Matthew didn't say a word at first. I could hear his breath warm, steady, just behind my shoulder. I froze, the sponge slipping from my hand and landing in the sink with a dull splash. "Why are you pretending?" he whispered. I turned slowly, candlelight dancing in his eyes. "Matthew, don't." He stepped closer. "Don't what?" His hand brushed my hip, deliberately, slowly. I should have pulled away. Should have screamed. Should have run. But I didn't. I let him. And then I responded. My breath caught in my throat as his fingers trailed the edge of my waist. I felt like I was watching someone else entirely, a stranger who looked like me, sounded like me, but wasn't me. And yet, in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, seen. The storm raged outside, but it was nothing compared to the war inside me. Our bodies didn't collide. Not yet. But the line had been crossed. Fully. Clearly. Quietly. When I went to bed that night, I cried silently into the pillow beside Anthony's. Guilt strangled me, but beneath it, shamefully, was a pulsing thread of something else, desire. Matthew now knew. He knew I wouldn't stop him. And with that knowledge, he began to push. Further. Harder. More often. Lingering touches. A whisper in my ear as he passed by. His gaze, brazen and unflinching, watching me as I moved through the house. I told myself I could control it. That it had been a moment. That I could keep it from going any further. But I was wrong. The game had begun. And I was already losing. There are mornings when you wake with a pit in your stomach, a sense that something is about to tip, to shift, to rupture in a way that cannot be undone. That morning, I woke with that exact feeling. 2 weeks late. I'd counted, recounted, and tried to convince myself it was stress, hormones, anything but what it might actually be. I lay there in bed, listening to Anthony's steady breathing beside me, the duvet rising and falling over his chest like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. At 7:03 a.m., I slipped into the bathroom, barely breathing. The pregnancy test lay on the counter, its plastic wrapper crumpled in my shaking hand. It felt cheap, absurdly small for something that could decide the fate of 3 lives. I watched it like it was ticking down a bomb. And then, 2 lines. 2 unmistakable, unforgiving pink lines. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, the world felt utterly still. Silent. As if the house itself was holding its breath alongside me. No. This couldn't be happening. We'd been reckless, I knew that, but not that reckless. Hadn't we? I didn't remember every time. Not clearly. That stormy night had blurred into others. Nights where Matthew had touched me like he already owned me, like he knew I wouldn't say no. And I hadn't. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the test. I wrapped it in tissue, shoved it deep into my robe pocket, and stepped back into the bedroom. Anthony was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the truth swelling inside me in more ways than one. I waited until midday. Until Anthony left for work. Until Matthew came downstairs, shirtless, smug, and whistling to himself like he didn't have a care in the world. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice low, tight. His smirk faltered just a little. "You're pale," he noted. "Something wrong?" I pressed the test into his hand. He looked down, then back at me, and he smiled. Not just a grin, it was relief. Satisfaction. Victory. "This is perfect," he said, nodding slowly. "Now we can stop hiding." I stared at him, horrified. "What are you talking about?" "We've been pretending for too long," he replied, stepping toward me. "But this makes it real. You'll tell him, right? You'll tell Dad." The word Dad made my stomach lurch. "I can't," I whispered. He leaned in closer. "You have 3 days. Tell him, or I will." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Thick. Choking. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a threat. It was a promise. That evening, I forced myself to sit at the table like everything was fine. I laid out the roast, set the glasses, poured the wine. Matthew sat across from me, his knee brushing mine every so often beneath the table. Anthony sat to my left, smiling warmly, none the wiser. He was laughing about something his client had said earlier that day, something about pension plans and retirement goals, when he looked over at me and reached for my hand. "I was thinking," he said gently, "we should take a trip. Just us. No work, no stress, a little reset. We've been off, haven't we?" My heart shattered. He was trying. He loved me. Through all of this, through my lies, my silence, my betrayal, he still saw us. He still believed in us. Tears stung my eyes. I looked down at my plate, unable to meet his gaze. Matthew was watching me, a flicker of something dark behind his expression. That's when I saw it. This wasn't about affection, not for Matthew. It wasn't about love, or chemistry, or forbidden moments in the dark. It was about control, the video, the touches, the slow, creeping invasion of every corner of my life. This wasn't an accident. It was a plan. He'd been orchestrating it from the start. He'd known exactly what he was doing when he let me see that footage. When he tested boundaries. When he whispered in the dark. I thought I was spiraling because of desire, guilt, shame. But the truth was far more dangerous. I'd let him in. I'd crossed the line. And now I was trapped. It was 3 a.m. The house was still, breathing in the quiet. Anthony was asleep in the bedroom, unaware, peaceful, dreaming of a life that had already crumbled beneath him. And Matthew. I didn't know if he was awake or lying in wait, but I couldn't take that risk. I had to go. I moved through the house like a ghost. I didn't bother folding my clothes. I stuffed a few into a worn suitcase, grabbed my handbag, and paused in the kitchen just long enough to write a note. My hand trembled as I pressed the pen to the page. "I'm sorry. I can't explain yet. Please know I loved you. I still do." I took off my wedding ring and placed it beside the letter. The cold of the kitchen counter against my fingers was the last thing I felt before I turned and walked away from everything, my marriage, my shame, my mistakes. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as I drove down the winding roads with no idea where I was headed. Just away. I found a motel off the A41, the kind where the walls are thin and the carpets never quite stop smelling of old smoke and damp air. The man at the front desk didn't ask questions. I gave a false name, paid in cash, and locked myself in room 6 with nothing but a suitcase, a kettle that barely worked, and the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in weeks, I slept. But peace never lasts. A pounding on the door jolted me awake. Not a knock, a thud. Demanding. Angry. Familiar. I crept to the door, pressed my eye to the warped glass. Matthew. And behind him, Anthony. My throat closed. I opened the door just before Matthew could knock again, hoping to avoid a scene that would rouse the entire building. Matthew barged in like he owned the place, wet from the rain, his expression unreadable. Anthony followed slowly, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot. He looked from me to the suitcase, then back again. "Tell me it's not true," he said, his voice cracking. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Matthew stepped forward, hands in his pockets. Calm. Controlled. "She doesn't need to lie anymore," he said smoothly. "It's over. You should know." Anthony looked like he'd been hit. "No what?" Matthew turned to him, his tone gentle, almost pitiful. "We're having a baby. She's with me now." The silence was deafening. Anthony stared at me, waiting for denial. For me to scream that it wasn't true. That it was all a mistake. That Matthew had gone mad. But I said nothing. Because it was true. I watched as the man who had loved me most began to collapse in front of my eyes. He backed away slowly, like the room itself had become poisonous. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I looked down. "A while," Matthew said, smiling. Anthony left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him like a final breath. Silence again. Then, Matthew laughed. That went better than expected. I turned to him, eyes blazing. "You planned this." He shrugged. "You were the one who couldn't keep your hands off me." My stomach turned. He said it like it was a game. Like I was a piece on a board, moved precisely where he wanted me. The footage. The threats. The pregnancy. All of it, calculated. "I loved you," I whispered. "Or thought I did." But that wasn't love, was it? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw it. The manipulation, the cold strategy, the smug pride in how perfectly it had all unfolded. This wasn't about desire. It wasn't even about obsession. It was about control. "You thought you owned me," I said, grabbing my bag. Matthew moved to block the door. "Where do you think you're going?" "Anywhere but here." "You're pregnant," he said flatly. "You need someone." "I need to breathe," I said. And I pushed past him. Out into the night. The rain had stopped. The air felt cleaner. Lighter. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt free. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. No phone call. No message. No fight. Just a plain manila envelope left at the threshold of my new, modest flat above a laundrette, a place that smelled faintly of soap and fresh linen, not lies or broken promises. Anthony had let go. Silently, without bitterness or rancor. His absence spoke volumes. It was over. The quiet sting of that finality was tempered by a fragile sense of relief. I had expected anger, recrimination, something to hold on to in the wreckage of our shared history. Instead, there was only silence. Perhaps that was his way of saying goodbye. Or perhaps he was already gone in his heart. I found refuge in routine. A small, cozy bookstore at the edge of town became my sanctuary. The owner, an elderly woman named Lily, took me under her wing without questions or judgment. Here, amid the scent of old paper and polished wood, I began to rebuild the shattered pieces of myself. No more secrets. No more shame. Just the steady rhythm of quiet days and whispered pages turning. 7 months pregnant, I moved slower now, each step a reminder of the life growing inside me. One damp afternoon, the bell above the shop door tinkled. I looked up. There he was, Matthew. Wet from the rain, calm and composed as ever, as if nothing had changed. His eyes held that same unsettling certainty. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I want a DNA test," he said simply. "And if you refuse, I'll take this to court." The threat was clear. He was not done. Not by a long shot. When the time came, I faced labor alone, no partner, no advocate, just the sharp sting of pain and the overwhelming strength I didn't know I possessed. The hospital room was stark and bright, the sterile smell mixing with the scent of new life. And then she arrived, my daughter, perfect. Flawless. A spark of hope in the darkest storm I'd ever weathered. Not long after, Matthew reappeared, this time flanked by a lawyer, his demands louder, sharper. Shared custody. Full custody. He played the game like a seasoned player, armed with cold strategy and legal muscle. But this time, I was ready. I stood my ground with fierce determination. I had a plan. A network of support, of women who had walked similar paths and extended their hands when I needed it most. 3 days later, I vanished once more. This time it was different. A new name, a new city, a new life carved out with intention and courage. No looking back. Only forward. The bookstore owner, Lily, handed me an envelope as I left. Help a sister in Oregon, she said softly, slipping cash into my palm. Her kindness was a lifeline, a promise that I was not alone. Before I stepped onto the bus, I penned a letter to Anthony. Raw. Honest. A final reckoning with the past. Dear Anthony, I'm sorry our daughter will never know the father she deserves. Some mistakes cannot be forgiven, and for that, I carry the weight every day. But I'm trying to become someone our daughter can look up to. This is goodbye, not because I don't care, but because I must. Now it's just the two of us. And this time, I won't run, but I will never look back. As the bus rumbled to life beneath the soft glow of morning light, I held my daughter close, feeling her heartbeat steady against mine. We were starting over. No longer prisoners of secrets or control. Just two souls bound by love, and the fierce promise of freedom.